You're watching Pat Plays, and this is another episode of Coffee and Nostalgia. So a few episodes ago I was talking about the Terminator 4 film that I made in 2004, and in this we saw some of the very first movie props that I ever built myself specifically for a film. So we had the minigun made out of Kinects. And then we also had the Kinects Terminator arm. So yeah, unless you're counting that terrible worm sock puppet that I made for the film Worms, then the Terminator 4 props are probably the first props that I ever made for a film. And there's plenty of other props that I've made specifically for films or for fancy dress, and I thought that'd be a pretty good topic to talk about in today's episode. So we talked about that minigun and the robot arm, and another one that I talked about recently was the chainsaw arm that I built specifically for the Evil Dead Book of the Dead fan film that I made in 2008. So you got to have a pretty good look at this chainsaw that I built in some of the shots that I showed in that episode, but I just thought we'd take another quick look at it and show you a few more clips that it appeared in that film. So as I told you in that episode, the body of the chainsaw was made from just your average milk jug from Asda or Tesco, and then I've added to it just with cardboard and a bit of masking tape, and then I've covered the whole thing in masking tape and painted it all red. There's a vent towards the front which I just drew on with a permanent marker and drew the circle and the lines in it. The pull string, I made that out of random bits that I could find around the house, and it actually didn't pull at all, it just sort of hung there on that little piece of string. And so there is a shot where it shows me pulling to start the chainsaw, but in that shot I just made sure that my arms were sort of low down on the screen. And then the actual sort of chainsaw blade itself, that's just a few pieces of cardboard glued together, cut into the shape of the chainsaw. And as I said in that previous episode, the chain that went round the chainsaw actually came from a Kinects roller coaster.
The Screaming Serpent from Kinects. It's not the world's biggest construction set, it's the world's smallest real roller coaster.
So I just glued that round with a ton of glue and then spray painted the whole thing in sort of a metal silver colour. And if I slow down the scene where I actually attach the chainsaw to my arm and then turn it round, you can see the whole chain comes completely loose in that shot. There's also an extra handle attached to the body of the chainsaw. Again, I'm not really sure what I used for that. As far as I can remember, it was the handle of a paint roller. So yeah, that was Ash's chainsaw hand from Evil Dead, The Book of the Dead from 2008. And it wasn't long after this that I actually wanted to do a sequel to that film, but it just never got made. And for the sequel, I wanted to make an even better chainsaw hand, which looked as realistic as I could possibly make it at the time. So here it is, you're looking at it right here. I still have this prop some 12 years later, and it unfortunately never got used in any sort of sequel to that film or as a fancy dress prop. So as you can see this time round, it definitely has more of a closer resemblance to the actual chainsaw in the Evil Dead films. I used this red petrol can for the body so that I didn't have to end up painting that part. And then as you can see, I actually got a bit handy and I've used nuts and bolts and I've attached an actual wooden dowel handle to the side. And the pull string and the little metal connector that you can see on this chainsaw is actually the same one that I used from the previous chainsaw hand, but that one was completely scrapped and I've reused that pull string part on this one. So I've made the chainsaw blade a little more movie accurate this time. It's a lot thinner, and I've again used multiple pieces of cardboard and glued them together and then cut the shape of the blade out. And then I attached this to the body of the can using nuts and bolts to attach it along the side. But I've covered that bit up using this piece of cardboard, which I glued on the side, and then I've just painted that red to match the can and to match the look of the chainsaw from the Evil Dead films. And as you can see along the side there, I've had to use tons and tons of glue to get that to stay on there because the chain was so heavy. And then the sort of arm connector at the end, that's just a simple piece of cardboard just wrapped around and then taped together. And then I've used silver masking tape along the whole thing just to keep it sturdy and to make it look more like metal. And as you can see, I can actually get my hand inside and use it just how it was used in the Evil Dead films. So yeah, I'm really really proud of that one. It's a really big shame that it never got used in any sort of Evil Dead fan films. But you never know, I might end up going as Ash Williams to some Halloween party, and that's why I've kept it around for 12 years. So sticking to the chainsaw theme, next up we have another chainsaw prop that I built around the similar time, I'd say around 2009, maybe 2010, I'm not too sure. But it was around the time that I was really into making my horror fan films. And this ridiculously massive chainsaw that you're looking at here was most likely going to be used in a Texas Chainsaw Massacre fan film, which unfortunately I never ended up making. And I know it was for a Texas Chainsaw Massacre fan film because here's the Leatherface mask which I bought especially for it, and this is based on his look from the 2003 remake. So just taking a look at this thing, you can see how ridiculously huge it is and how awesome it probably would have been to use in one of these films. So this time, instead of a milk jug, I've used what I think was a bleach container, which when it was laid on the side, it kind of had the look that I wanted because it already had a handle ready of what would be the chainsaw body. Again, I've just covered the whole thing in masking tape and simply painted it red. And then I've used an extra bit of cardboard to make that sort of circular ventilation piece that sticks out on the side. That's actually from a cheap shower drain. And then on the top of it, I've used a couple of bleach bottle caps, the ones that came with that jug. Here again, I've used a few nuts and bolts and a bit of metal that I could find lying around the house. And the actual blade itself, again, the same idea. It's a few pieces of cardboard glued together. I've attached this, as you can see on the side there, with 2 bolts that are just screwed into the chainsaw body itself. And then I've reused that Connex roller coaster chain yet again. This is the same one that I used for the chain in the first fan film that you saw. And I've again glued it to the cardboard here, but this time I must have used stronger glue because this one's actually sticking to it. And then as well as painting the whole thing silver to give it that sort of metal realistic look, I also added a load of deep red paint to the top, and then I put it on its side and I just let this drip down itself to give that kind of blood splatter effect. So that's yet another crazy chainsaw prop that I made, which again is probably around 10 or 11 years old, and I never got a chance to use it in any of my fan films. So now we're around that year of 2009, and it was actually in 2009 when I made a trilogy of films which needed a very simple set of props built specifically for these films. And this is the Foster's Boy and Carling Kid trilogy. So you've seen the DVD covers that I made for these films in previous episodes, and now I finally get to talk about them. So the idea for these movies was that it was a couple of drunken superheroes which went around fighting crime wearing beer helmets on their heads. Unfortunately, in the films, they didn't actually end up doing much crime fighting at all. So the whole idea for Foster's Boy and Carling Kid came around in January of 2009, and I was at this house party with my friend Ben Heaton. And during this party, I ended up with a Foster's box on my head. He ended up with the Carling box on his head. And it was during that night that we came up with the names Foster's Boy and Carling Kid. So I just want to do a quick run through of these 3 films, and then I'll get into the props that we made for them. So released in February of 2009, we have the first film, simply titled Foster's Boy and the Carling Kid. In this film, we see the 2 unlikely heroes meeting for the first time.
Okay, this is gonna sound really weird, but last night, Jesus told me to buy a box of Carling and come to this address. I love you.
Getting drunk together in this crazy drunken montage.
Come on, let's go!
And then Ben has this fantastic idea.
No, right. I have like the greatest idea ever. What is it?
And there they are, the first 2 props that we made for the Foster's Boy and Carling Kid movies. And that, of course, is the beer helmets. So the 2 boys realise that they've run out of beer. They decide to take the bus to Ben's house.
Every moment spent with you is a moment I treasure.
And then they finally find more beer at Ben's house. That's it, that's the end of the first film. 5 months later, in July of 2009, we made Foster's Boy and the Carling Kid 2, The Rise of the Budweiser Baron. So in this film, we actually started adding a bit of story to it. And here we see Ben inviting Pat along to another drunken house party, but Pat unfortunately turns him down and says that he doesn't do that kind of thing anymore.
I don't do that stuff anymore. Oh, Ben?
Yes, Patrick?
Just do yourself a favour and stop drinking.
If this is the war of the worlds, then I don't wanna be a part.
So the two heroes split up and go their separate ways. Later on, the Carling kid frantically calls the Foster's boy on his mobile and tells him that all the beer was stolen from the house party that he was at by the first villain of the series, the Budweiser Baron.
No, you don't understand. He stole all the beer.
So this calls the Foster's boy back into action, and not long later the two guys are back together, getting drunk, before going out on their quest to find the Budweiser Baron.
You know what, Ben?
Yes, Patrick?
We're back.
It's the final countdown.
There he is! Wait, Ben!
So they take him out pretty easily, and just like that, they recover the stolen beer and take it back to the house party.
Wait a minute. If you could have took him out in one punch this whole time, you didn't really need my help at all, did you?
I needed someone to help me take the beers back to the party.
Alright.
So that was kind of the first crime that they managed to stop together. And that's the end of the sequel. Then 4 months later, in November of 2009, we released the final of the trilogy, Foster's Boy and the Carling Kid 3, The Revenge of the Alcohol Alliance. This was probably one of the biggest films that I actually made at the time, as it actually had multiple shooting days, the biggest cast that I've ever put together for a film, and multiple locations. So at the start of this film, we're introduced to the Alcohol Alliance.
I do love beer.
Okay. We all love beer. That's why we're in this team. The Alcohol Alliance.
And we find out that the Budweiser Baron, who the boys took out in the previous film, was actually a member of this Alcohol Alliance, and he had stolen that beer to take to their nightly gathering. So when the Cronenberg King and the rest of his men find out about this, they plan their revenge on the Foster's Boy and the Carling Kid.
Rob, who would do such a thing?
Wait a minute. Isn't that what we do?
What's the matter with you? Gentlemen, as of now, we are at war with the Foster's Boy and the Carling Kid.
After failing to get served at their local pub using a pretty convincing fake ID, the boys decide to just go back home and get drunk again in a classic Foster's Boy and Carling Kid drinking montage.
Hello?
Sir, I've located Foster Boy and Carling Kid. Should I proceed to follow?
Affirmative, Private. Good job.
After this, the Carling Kid gets knocked out and captured by one of the Alcohol Alliance, Private Pilsner, and he gets taken to the Cronenberg King's lair. So it's up to the Foster's Boy to save him and save the day.
Silence when in presence of the king! You are in the secret lair of the Alcohol Alliance.
What do you want with me?
I hear you've had a confrontation with our friend, the Budweiser Baron. Oh, hey.
After hitching a ride with the Carlsberg Crusader, he begins to rescue the Carling Kid, and then they both end up taking on the Alcohol Alliance. And there we go, it's all over, a job well done, and the boys walk off into the night. So there you go, that was the Foster's Boy and Carling Kid trilogy from 2009. But of course in this video we're talking about props, so let's talk about the beer helmets. So here they are, the Foster's Boy and Carling Kid helmets. Now out of these two, the only one which is the actual original one is the one that was worn by Ben. And this one here, this is the Carling helmet, and this is the only one to make it all the way through the 3 films. So he wore this in the first film, the sequel, and the final film. And as you can see, I still have it to this day. Now the Foster's Boy helmet, on the other hand, the one that was worn in the first film and then worn again in the second film, no longer exists. As you can see in this shot from the second film, Rise of the Budweiser Baron, even by then it was already in a pretty dismal state and the thing was just falling apart. So when it came around to the trilogy, I threw this one away and made a brand new one, which is the one you're looking at now, and it's the one that I still have today. So this one here only made an appearance in the 3rd film of the trilogy, but I'm still happy that I at least have one of them that was from the very first film. So moving on into the sequel, we obviously had the Budweiser Baron, so we had to make a Budweiser helmet, and that's the one right here, which was worn by Joe Andrew, who played the Budweiser Baron. And then when it came to the 3rd film, that's when things got really fun for me, because I had to make a new beer helmet for each of these new characters. So first up we have Sergeant Strongbow, who was portrayed by Louis Yeomans. He of course wore the Strongbow helmet. Next up we have the Beck's Bandit, who was portrayed by Chauncey Mulderig. I love his helmet with the teeth added to the mouth. Next up was Private Payne Pilsner, who was portrayed by Mason Wells. So he of course wore the Pilsner helmet. Then we had Ollie Call playing the flamboyant Stella Swine. His helmet was brilliant because obviously I've made it look like a pig. I made a little snout on the front and it even had a curly tail attached to the back, as well as the 2 ears on top. And then finally we have the leader of the Alcohol Alliance, the Cronenberg King, played by Felix Mulderig. I can't take all the credit for the Cronenberg King's helmet because me and Felix actually made that one together. And because we were all 17, not many of us drove or even had our own car. But one of our college friends, Martin Hillier, actually did have a car, and that is why he was in the film as the Carlsberg Crusader.
Thank you, Carlsberg Crusader. I will tell tales of your bravery in this hour of darkness. Yeah, whatever, man. Good luck, man.
So that is all the beer helmets that I made and are featured in the Foster's Boy and Carling Kid trilogy. So after this, the original Foster's Boy and Carling Kid helmets did actually make their way into a few other projects. Firstly was this lip-syncing music video starring me, Ben and Ollie, and we're singing along to I Miss You by Blink-182, basically saying I miss you to the Foster's Boy and Carling Kid as the trilogy was over. And that was released in November of 2009, just after the release of The Revenge of the Alcohol Alliance. The original Foster's Boy helmet would then go on to make an appearance in the short film that I made in 2017 with Matt Pritchard called Team Pat.
Who's with me?
And as well as Joe Mountain and a few other characters, it of course includes the Foster's Boy. So the helmet that I wore in this short film is the original one, which I kept from Foster's Boy and Carling Kid 3. Both of the original helmets, the Foster's Boy and the Carling Kid helmets, would make their final cameo appearance in the Patendaki Endgame trailer parody. And because this trailer was sort of saying goodbye to a lot of our characters, I really wanted to at least cameo the Foster's Boy and Carling Kid characters. And so in the short scene with Stryker and the Merc in the underground subway, if you look closely there in the bottom right, you can see the Foster's Boy and Carling Kid helmets lying right there. So let's just quickly rewind back to 2009 now. I was planning on making a 4th film, but I wanted it to include a couple of friends who had not appeared in the previous films. So firstly, this was going to be Tom Whitworth, and he was going to be portraying the son of Sergeant Strongbow. And as you can see, this is the helmet that I made for him at the time, and that mohawk spine down the back was heavily influenced by the mohawk gremlin from Gremlins 2. And the other person that was going to be in these films was actually Aki, whose only appearance in the Foster's Boy and Calling Kid trilogy was actually in one blink and you'll miss it cameo from The Rise of the Budweiser Baron. And so he was going to return in the fourth film as Captain Corona. Wow. And there you can see, that is the helmet that I had made ready for Aki to play Captain Corona in the fourth Foster's Boy and Calling Kid film. And just to prove that this helmet was made back then, let's take another look at that Nightmare on Elm Street fan film that I made in 2010. As you can see in this shot here, just in the background when Aki goes into my bedroom, and right there is the Captain Corona helmet which he was going to be wearing. Now it wasn't actually until around 2012 that I began working on a fourth Foster's Boy and Calling Kid film. And this is something that I don't think anybody actually knows about, apart from Matt Pritchard, who helped me with the filming and helped me get started with the project. So what you're looking at here is the raw footage that we shot in 2012 in Matthew's garage at the time. And I believe the idea here is that my character is getting sick of being in a team with the Carling Kid, and so that's why I throw the Foster's Boy helmet to the ground. And then in an Iron Man style montage, I build this updated Foster's Boy helmet that you see right here. And the idea for this, I think, was to have that sort of Iron Man look to it. So I've made this whole thing out of cardboard. I've given it that sort of armored look using that metallic silver duct tape. And the only other footage that I have from this planned reboot of the series from 2012 is the footage that you're looking at right here. Now this was all filmed because I noticed that a lot of pubs around my local area seem to be closing down, so I thought that'd be a great story point for the Foster's Boy and Calling Kid film. And here I am showing off my 125cc motorbike that I had at the time, which I of course had planned to have as the Foster's Boy mobile or something in this film, but it never ended up happening. Here's a picture of me wearing a Foster's Boy helmet at Leeds Festival 2009. And it was actually at this festival which I went to a booth that made t-shirts for you. I had the Foster's Boy t-shirt made. It first made an appearance in October of 2009. And this was where I was helping out some friends of mine who had to make a film trailer for their media class. And they made the zombie horror comedy trailer for Meat Feast.
I think I just got bitten by a zombie.
Was it Jacko? Was it Heath Ledger?
Where it is? Let's haul some ass!
After this, the next time I wore that t-shirt was in October of 2010, and this is when we released Ghost Hunters 3. And I will most likely make a video about this series in October. It's Halloween. As you can see here, I also had Foster's Boy printed on the back of my sixth form Leavers hoodie, and Ben of course had Carling Kid on the back of his. Just had to make a fresh pot of coffee. Man, I think this is going to be a long one, isn't it? Okay, that's all the Foster's Boy and Calling Kid talk, I promise. There's other props to talk about. So, trying to keep this video slightly chronological, the next prop that I made was in 2012, and this was my own replica of the Bane mask from The Dark Knight Rises, which had recently been released. Now you have already seen this in a previous video, because this prop mask made an appearance in a short Patanaki sketch which never saw the light of day, called Bane's Nightmare from October 2012. So the way that I made the mask itself was kind of odd. I believe that I used a beanie hat as the base of it, and then I cut out the shape of the mask in this beanie, and then I used that as a template to start attaching pieces of cardboard to it to then build the mask itself. The sort of breathing tubes that you can see on the top, that was simply some hose pipe which I cut to size. The front breathing part of the mask was made out of different sections of, again, a bleach bottle, and then I used some more glue and some nuts and bolts to strap this whole front breathing part to the front of the mask. And then once it was all put together, I simply spray painted the whole thing green. And just to throw in there for good measure, here's a picture of me stood next to the actual screen-used Bane mask and Bane costume at the Warner Brothers studio in LA. So that Bane mask was actually originally made for a fancy dress party, which never ended up happening. And since we're talking about fancy dress, let's have a look at some of the costumes that I've made in the past. First up, from October of 2008, of course, this was a Halloween party, I dressed up as Heath Ledger's Joker from Batman: The Dark Knight. And for this costume, I actually have a really short video clip simply titled "The Joker Goes to Asda." So here's the tie, which I believe I got from a charity shop. And then I even still have the shirt that I wore that night. And as you can see here, it's not been washed in 12 years. Yep, a real piece of history right there. And here's another picture from 2008 where I dressed up as Wolverine, complete with leather jacket and cardboard claws. Next up, we have a short film from 2010, which was actually shot on our sixth form Leavers Day, where it's tradition for everybody to turn up in fancy dress. And for this, I dressed up as a Spartan from 300. Now, the helmet and the sword I actually bought, but the shield, the braces and the brooch, the cape, the shorts, and the leg armor were all made by myself. And as you can see, Sam also came as some sort of sword-wielding warrior, and so we made this little impromptu short film called The Final Battle.
You dick.
And finally, we have a costume which probably took the most effort I've ever put into anything I've made, which is when I dressed up as Dude Thor, I think he's known as now. And this was for a Halloween party last year, which was hosted by Sam's wife, Kirsty. This was an absolutely amazing Halloween party, and she put so much effort into dressing up the whole house and really setting the Halloween mood. There was a bit of a heroes and villains theme going on, and everybody's costumes were just absolutely spot on. There's also some great triple slap pictures from this night with me, Aki and Sam posing for a few shots in our costumes. And in all of these shots, you'll see that I'm also swinging around a pretty impressive life-size replica of Stormbreaker. So here you can see that I crafted the whole axe head and hammerhead part of it out of cardboard and simply masking tape that all together. I then used a wooden broom pole for the handle, and then I surrounded this in some insulation piping foam. After I was happy with the shape, I covered the whole thing in masking tape ready for painting. I attached the extra hammerhead details, and I then began the spray painting of the metal section, and then I hand painted the wooden handle section. In order to create the look of the vines that actually go around the axe head, I used some more of that insulation foam piping, and I cut them down into small strips. I wrapped masking tape around each one of these, painted them brown to match the handle, and then attached them all one by one. And then I went over and painted everything up again. I used a black Sharpie on the metal section just for all those extra fine details, and then you have the finished prop itself. So that is a life-size replica of Stormbreaker, and it was totally worth the effort. Whew, God, I can't believe it. That's it, we're done. So that was a look back at some of my handmade props. This has been another episode of Coffee and Nostalgia, and I will see you again next time.